Hi everyone, and welcome to the Festive Tech Calendar 2024, my session on Yule login safely. Before we get into the session, I want to give a big shout out to Richard Hooper, Gregor Suti, Lisa Simon, and all the Festive Tech Calendar team that put a lot of effort in to make this happen every year. Thank you. Also, this year's chosen charity is Beats and Cancer Charity. I urge you to take a look at the website, take a look at the great work that they are doing, and if you can, please contribute. I've included a link to the charity homepage below. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mohammed Sajid. Everyone calls me Saj. I'm a senior infrastructure architect at Net Company. I worked in the IT industry 15, maybe 20 years now, everything from on-prem, support desk to engineering to architecture, hybrid solutions, and mostly focused on cloud. Now, I hold several Azure certifications. I'm an MCT and co-founder and co-host of the Bradford Cloud User Group. If you're interested in tech, passionate about tech, and want to share your knowledge, my suggestion is get involved in any of the user groups. If you want to present to the Bradford Cloud User Group, please reach out to me or Simon or Imran Rashid. I'll leave their details at the end of this video. Also, get involved with the Festive Tech Calendar. I'm sure the guys will be running it and the girls will be running it in 2025, so please reach out to the team if you want to present next year. In this session, we're going to focus on Entra ID and Entra ID's capabilities about securing your user logon sessions. So we'll take a look at security defaults at a really high level, because in my test tendency, security defaults is disabled, reinforcing it through conditional access. We'll take a look at the reasons why. We'll take a look at MFA and the different types of MFA that Entra ID supports. We'll take a look at identity protection, role-based access control, and how you can use PIM to enhance RBAC and the capabilities that PIM provides and how you configure that. And we'll take a look at the Entra ID portal and its capabilities from configuration to monitoring and management. Like most of the Azure products, you need a license to use some of the more advanced capabilities of Entra ID. So Entra ID Free, for example, will give you access to MFA for all users. It will give you security defaults and MFA that you can utilize using the Authenticator app. If you want to use a different form of MFA, like FIDO2 keys, like biometrics, you need a P1 or P2 license. I've included Entra ID Suite license just for information here. You don't need it for some of the stuff that we're looking at in this presentation and in this demo. But if you want to look at GSA, Global Secure Access, or some of the new capabilities that it's providing, there are add-on licenses or an Entra Suite license that gives that capability. Take a look at the Entra licensing portal, Entra licensing webpage for the information and a comparison table as to what the different Entra ID licenses offer you and what they cost. You can always sign up for a trial license, 30 days, some of them run for 90 days, and you could try this capability out before paying for it. As I mentioned, security defaults is enabled by default on all tenants. As of July-August 2024, Microsoft made some additional changes to the security default, so it's worth looking at the page. And we'll take a brief look at it when we're looking at the demo. So for example, you could default MFA or delay MFA, should I say, for 14 days. You can't do that anymore. So when you come to register user and security defaults is enabled, the user has to register for MFA before carrying on their logon process. It provides some benchmarks and some basics around password protection, account lockout policies, and other protections against cyber threats. And this is enabled on all tenancies by default. You can have security defaults enabled or enable MFA through conditional access. You can't do both. For more information, go to aka.ms/security defaults, and we'll take a look at this page briefly when we're looking at the demo. We'll spend some time looking at conditional access, what it does, how it works, and the type of conditions you can define. As it states, you have to define a policy, and the policy has to have some conditions in it. So if the conditions are met, some action can be taken. Allow access, deny access, and force the user to take additional steps like reset their password, like enforce them to use a particular MFA method when logging on to their device to an application. Some of the MFA methods that are supported in Entra ID are a text message or SMS message sent to your mobile phone, a code sent to your registered email address, Authenticator app, code from your authenticator app, push notifications to your authenticator app via the two keys, biometrics, and we'll take a look at some of this. And how multi-factor authentication works is it takes signals from various users, applications, devices, depending on whether you're using Defender for endpoint or other capabilities. It'll take real-time data and feed that into your environment, and then you could use that as part of the conditions that you're defining. And you can define in the policies within conditional access whether you're going to allow users, if they meet the conditions that you've defined, you can allow them access. If you can enforce MFA, or in some cases if they meet a particular condition, for example, you can say we want to block access if users are coming from all these conditions, and if a user is coming from that condition, you can block access. And we'll look at this. Identity protection. So identity protection looks at user risk and user sign-in risk. It builds up a profile of who the user is, what their typical usage is, and if there's any variance in that particular usage. So in my case, it'll build up a profile of the IP addresses that I'm connecting in from, the locations that I'm connecting in from, my home, the office, other businesses when I'm traveling to customer sites where I log in from, and look at the fact that on one day, for example, that I log in at 8 o'clock from my home location, 20 minutes later I will log in from Scotland or Moscow or China or the United States or somewhere else. Now that kind of travel in that duration is not possible. So once it sees that, depending on what you've configured, it could take action like block access, or force you to log in again, force you to use MFA to log in. If your account is compromised and there's a list of passwords that are on a compromised list that it monitors in the background that Microsoft keeps, it can block access because your identity has been compromised. If you're coming from a location trying to log in from a website that's known to have malicious software on that particular website, it can block access. And identity protection, as mentioned, is a premium P2 feature. You will need a P2 license to use most of the capabilities of identity protection. You get some limited reporting for free Entra ID and for the P1 capability that Entra ID provides. Role-based access control. We'll spend some time looking at the roles that Entra ID provides for you. And what you really want to do is give the minimum role that a user needs to do their job. Role give a user a set of permissions, and these are privileged permissions that a user can do certain actions when logging into your environment. So you don't want to over provision the roles, or over provision the capability that you're giving to your users. Best security practice is to give the minimum level that they need. You also want to give them permissions at a time that they need it, and for a specific duration. This is where PIM comes in. So we'll look at what PIM does, the capabilities that PIM provides. PIM is, you can configure PIM to be a request approval process. So when a user logs into portal.azure.com, for example, they log in using their standard Azure account, and it has standard privileges, no standard user account, no elevated privileges. Then they need to elevate that account to get to those privilege permissions that you assign them, and those permissions are time based, and they are providing access to those privileges that you assign your particular user. So you need to be granular, or you can be extremely granular in the permissions that you grant them. So if the user has privileges, or if the roles that you assign them don't meet your security requirements, you can always create custom roles and assign them, and they will work with PIM as well. PIM provides just in time, just enough access, and it audits everything the user does. So you can have auto approval, you can have a request approval process where the user request for elevating the privileges goes to another user, and they need to assess that request and see if it's a valid request and approve it. And those approvals are time based, and we'll see how the duration that you can set. And after that duration expires, you can, or before the duration expires, you can request an extension. If it expires, you have to request elevation of your privileges again. We'll look at the Entra.Microsoft.com portal and the capabilities that it provides around alerting, monitoring, and configuration. All these capabilities that we've just spoken really at a high level about. In conclusion, for this section anyway, Entra ID provides a comprehensive security capability. We've already touched on some of the capabilities that it's providing, because this presentation is focused around Entra ID Security for when the user is logging on. There is other capabilities that it provides, like single sign-on, for example. We may touch on if there's time, but I'll share a link about Entra ID and some of the other capabilities that it provides if you're interested in that. Thank you for watching the presentation. Now what we'll do is we'll jump over to the Azure portal and take a look at a demo for this session. So looking at the portal, if you're new to Azure and you want to log into portal.azure.com, just navigate to that or search for that in any search engine. So I've logged in here with my credentials, and again, if you're new, you won't have anything here. What this is showing you is the recent items that you've searched for. So what we want to do is look at some of what we looked at during the PowerPoint presentation. And we're going to start by looking at security defaults and conditional access, and they're within the Entra ID capability here. So this won't show up for you if you're new. So if you select the icon on the left hand side, my left hand side, you should see Microsoft Entra ID in the favorites. It's one of the favorites for me. It was default. It might not be there for you. You might have to select it or search for Entra ID in the search bar, or any other capability that you're looking for within Azure. And once you're ready, click on Entra ID. On the home page, it gives you some basic information about the tenant that you're logged in with. So, the name of the tenant, your tenant ID, primary domain, for example. As you can see here, I'm using an Entra ID P2 license to demo some of this. It gives us a number of users, security groups that you have created, applications, devices, that sort of stuff. I'll give you some information about your secure score, and we'll take a look at that later on. So to get to security defaults, go to Manage, expand Manage if it's not expanded, and navigate down to Properties. Once you select Properties, you will see security defaults enabled. So in this tenancy, security defaults are turned off, as it says here. Your organization is currently using conditional access. So as I mentioned during the presentation, you can either use security defaults to enable and enforce stuff like MFA, or you can use conditional access. In this environment, we're using conditional access. But if you click on Learn More, it will take you to the page about security defaults from Microsoft Entra ID. And the page provides lots of information about who it's for, who uses conditional access, how you enable some of the capability, how you enable to disable it, and some of the new features and the capabilities around conditional access and the changes that Microsoft are making. For example, this bit here it talks about the grace period. New users won't get this grace period anymore, 14 days to delay registering for MFA. They have to register for MFA when they are logging in, or they can't continue. So to get to conditional access in portal.azure.com, under below properties you've got security, select security, and you've got conditional access. And we'll come, you've got identity protection and a whole host of other capabilities here. So we mentioned identity protection, user risk and user sign-in risk, and you can use those risks within conditional access. So before we look at conditional access, let's look at identity protection. So on the default page, it'll show you host information. Bear in mind, this is a test tenancy. You're not really going to see a lot, unfortunately, but it'll show you number of attacks blocked, users protected, high-risk users, and lots of other interesting information on your tenant. Blocked one in my case, 100% success rate. Under protect, you've got risky policies and user risk policies and sign risk policies. So if you look at the user risk policy, assignment is to all users. User risk is low and above, so you want it low, medium, high. And what control do you want? Block access, allow access requires MFA, and the same applies to sign risk users. And then under reports, you've got user risk reports, and it'll give you also some information about that. You can download the report if there's any data in there you wanted to keep for auditing purposes. Risky sign-ins, and then risk detections. Like I said, this is a test tenancy. You'll see very limited data in this, and we could digest if you want it as an email. It will send you an email alert, and I'll send it to a particular address. So in my case, I've got it sent to several users, and it's enabled sending those weekly digests to those particular users. So when you go to conditional access, you've got the ability to look at the policies and create a new policy. But before we do that, let's look at some of the other capabilities. So you've got name locations. So as I mentioned in the PowerPoint slide, you can have locations that you want to define by IP range, by country or location. So if you want users that are connecting to this particular tenancy to come from defined IP ranges, you can create that here, give it a name, test, for example, mark as trusted location, and then you can add an IP range in here. And then when you create your conditional access policies, it will you can use that as one of the conditions to say users need to come from a trusted location, trusted country. So I've got an allow country list. If you look at this allow country list, you'll see that everything is blocked. But if you scroll to the bottom, the only thing that I'm allowing is the United Kingdom. So it's up to you. It depends on what your needs are for your particular organization, where you want to allow users to connect from, where you want to block users from. The other thing that you have is VPN. So in this tenancy, VPN is not configured. You've got sign-in logs. We'll come back and take a look at the sign-in logs in a moment. You've got these terms of use. So if you want users to have or select or acknowledge the terms of use for your organization, you can define that in here. So when you create it, you give it a name, you upload the file as a PDF, you can select the language that you want to display name. Then here it gives you the ability whether you require users to expand the terms of use. So when it flashes up and it's a page, 2 pages, 3 pages long, they need to actually scroll to the bottom. They may not read it, but they need to scroll to the bottom before they can acknowledge it. So do you want them to consent on every device, or do you consent on a single device? So by default it's turned off. If you were to turn this on, if they went from their mobile device to their tablet, so their mobile phone to their tablet, to their PC, to their Linux device, whatever market device, whatever they're using, every time they logged onto a different device, they would have to acknowledge these terms of use. And you can apply an expiry to this, when you want it to expire. And you can reference these within your conditional access. So when we look at our policies, you can create a new policy. And so test MFA, for example. So once you've given it a unique name or a name that fits within your naming convention, take a look at users. Users, you can apply the policy to all users. You'll get a warning, don't lock yourself out. You can exclude users if you want to apply to all users except your own account. So you can exclude a specific user. You can exclude directory roles, like you don't want it to apply to global administrators, but you want it to apply to everybody else. It depends on what your security needs are in your organization, and you can apply to select users. So the recommendation is apply it to a small group of users, test users, test policy out those particular test users, make sure it works, make sure there's no unintended consequences, and then you can roll it out wider. If you're using break glass accounts, and the recommendation is to have break glass accounts, then you don't want to apply some of these policies to your break glass accounts. So when you look at target resources, so what resources do you want to target? You want to target all resources. So all your Azure portals, your Office 365 portals, any of the apps that you publish within your environment, do you want to have all global secure access? So GSA resources is not covered in here. We will look at it briefly within the Entra ID portal. But again, I'm not covering it in here, but I did do a session recently with the Welsh Azure user group on global secure access, what it is and how you configure it. So I recommend you check that out. Or very specific resources. So if we select resources, when it loads up, you can see that you can target Azure portals, you can target the Office 365 portals, or the Office 365 capability. You can target specific portal like Azure Key Vault, Azure Linux VM sign-in. It depends what your needs are. If you've got various apps deployed within here in your environment, you can like SSH, you can deploy those. You might want to use this policy to set conditions when logging on to those particular applications. If you want to define a network location, so what do you want to do? Do you want it to apply to any network that the user is coming from? You want to apply to all trusted networks? This gets created when you configure some of the GSA policies. So do you want to have all compliant networks, or do you want to apply to certain networks? So when a user is coming from a large country list, for example, so if you're saying user is coming from the UK, we're going to grant access. Or if user is coming from a list where you've got everything and you've disallowed for the UK, you can block access, for example. So we can select this one. And then conditions, what conditions do you want to apply? So we looked at identity protection and user risk. So do you want to enable it for a user risk? So if the user is low, medium or high risk, depending on how you want to categorize it, you can enable that. You can enable sign-in risk as well. So if the risk is medium, enable that. Then some action will be taken, they will be blocked, or they will reset their password. So inside risk, you can enable it for inside risk, elevated or moderate. We'll leave that one disabled. Again, you can then target the platform the user is coming from, whether they're coming from an Android platform, iOS or Windows platform, Mac or Linux. So if you want to apply to the user irrespective of what platform they're coming from, you can have it coming from any device. You can then also configure an exclusion to say if they're coming from a Windows machine, don't apply this policy, but if they're coming from anywhere else, apply this policy. So it really depends what your needs are. Then if you look at grant, what do you want to do? Do you want to block access? So if they meet the conditions that you've defined here, block access, or do you want to grant access? And if you're granting access, what do you want them to do? You can enable MFA, which is the other way of doing it. You can enforce a certain type of MFA, so basic username, password, and a text message to your phone. Stronger methods such as the authenticator app, or phishing resistant like FIDO2 keys, for example. So in this case, we'll enable stronger, not FIDO2 keys. So you could configure FIDO2 keys here. It's entirely up to you. Do you want the device to be marked as compliant? We'll take a look at that in a minute. Do you want requiring an app to be from approved list, app protection policies? Do you want them to acknowledge your terms of use? And we looked at terms of use briefly. So enable select terms of use. So if you want the device to be marked as compliant, depending on the device it comes from, the device needs to be registered within Entra ID and rolled into Intune Intrusion MDM solution, and that is scope for what we're looking at here. But what would happen if you take this is, if we look at our Intune portal, if you look at Windows, so the devices I'm using are my test devices. So Windows devices, you've got compliance policies and configuration policies. So you can configure compliance policies for Windows 10 basic compliance, and you've got a list of property. If you've got a list of policies that are configured within here, so firewall needs to be turned on, antivirus needs to be enabled, anti-spyware needs to be installed, real-time protection needs to be enabled. You've got simple passwords are blocked. So the device needs to meet these compliance policies that you define within the Intune compliance policy. Then you apply it to those particular devices. Then when you look at those devices need to be marked as compliant. So if you look at our test devices, you'll see some of them are compliant, some of them are not. So if you apply the policy to this device that's not compliant, even if you met every other condition, you will only be allowed to log in. But if you're coming from a device that's marked as compliant, you'll be able to log in. So take that. The alternative to this is you can have session control. Well, no alternative, you can also configure that as well as the grant. So what do you want to do? So use app enforcement restrictions, use conditions for app control, sign-in frequency, persistent browser sessions. So do you want the sessions to be persistent? Do you want users to have a sign-in frequency? How often do you want them to log back in? So every hour, every day, for example. Use global secure access profile, disable resilient defaults. So if you want additional information about any of this capability, if you hover it, says during an outage, Microsoft Entra ID will extend access to existing sessions while enforcing condition access policies. So it depends on what you really want to do, and you have this capability. Once you're happy with what you've configured, you can enable the policy. You can have it in report-only mode. If you have it in report-only mode, it will still show you what happens to that policy in the sign-in logs. You can enable it or turn it off. So if you look at the sign-in logs, it will show you information about your users, whether they're date and time, the ID, who the user was, whether it was successful, whether it was interrupted, whether it failed. and whether multi-factor authentication is required. So if you select one of these, we're logging on to Azure portal, that's the application that we're connecting to here. It gives you basic information about the user, date and time, correlation ID, request ID, user username, and a whole host of other information about the particular user, location, device information, and then it gives you conditional access. So it was a success, so MFA was a success. We needed MFA to log in. All the others are not applied. Then it shows you report only. So in this case, report only is not applied because the user is not sitting in any of these particular policies, or these policies not applied to those particular users. But if your policy was applied to a particular user and it didn't apply because you got in report only mode, it will show you in here. The other thing that we talked about was role-based access control and PIN. So what we're going to do is navigate back to our Entra ID portal. And once you expand manage, you'll see you've got roles and administrators. So if you select that, you'll see in here, when it loads up, there's a whole host of roles. Some are marked as privileged, some are not marked as privileged. So if you wanted to, you can filter on service type and administrative unit privilege. So now, for example, if you just take a look at all the privileged roles, so you've got application administrators all the way down to directory writers, help desk administrators. So these are users when they log into your environment, your Azure environment. If they've got one of these roles assigned to them, they're considered privileged because they can do things above what a standard user can do. So if you, like a global administrator, can essentially do almost everything in your particular environment. If you select the role itself, it gives you who the role is assigned to. It gives you a description about the particular role and all the role permissions that are listed here. Read role properties for consent for applications registered with Microsoft Entra ID. Manage all aspects of authorization policy, read. So you get the picture. And then role settings. So in role settings, you can configure settings. So this is essentially, because I have PIM enabled in this environment, what PIM is doing. So we'll take a look at PIM in a minute. But what you've got is a whole host of roles within Entra ID. And if you wanted to create, so what you want to do in your organization is work out what role fits your users and assign that role to a user or a group, and then ideally to a group, unless the users in that group and they inherit the permissions from that particular group. If there's a role in here that doesn't meet your requirements, you can already create a custom role. If you give it a name, new custom role, give it a description. You can start from scratch, or you can clone a role. So you can clone a role, the role you want to clone. Oh, I can't clone from custom role because I don't have a custom role at this moment in time. So let's just start that again. New custom role. Give it a description. Then click next, and essentially you can go through and select what permissions you want to give. So you can go storage, it's late in the day, apologies people. So we'll look at permissions for resources specifically. So the reason why storage isn't in here is because storage is not an Entra ID role. It is specific to a particular entity like storage. So when you look at storage, you'll see those particular roles in there. So if you select read in here, for example, it gives you Microsoft Directory Reader role. So create application policies, read all properties, including privilege properties and application policies. So if you wanted to give people read-only permission to certain resources, read owners on application policies, we can select and create this custom role. Once we're happy with what we've done, we can click review and create, and click create, and it'll create this new custom role. And our new custom role is here. So if you want to create a new custom role, and we want you to clone from an existing custom role, should now allow us to select the role that we've just created. The other thing that we looked at when we looked at roles, so if we go back to our global administrator role, that we were looking at, when you looked at role settings, you saw a bunch of settings in here configured. Now this is taking the information, or this is similar to the information, or exactly the same as privileged identity management. That's what it's doing. You're defining conditions for this particular role as to the duration that will be enabled for, whether MFA is required, does it require justification. So if you look at this from a different portal, if you look at PIM, Privileged Identity Management, in here, if you look at my roles, so you've got eligible roles and active roles. If you look at my user, I'm eligible to elevate my privileges to become a security administrator, and at the moment it's not activated. Roles that are assigned to me permanently are security administrator, global administrator, compliance administrator. Yes, a bad example because I've got security administrator as an active role and as an eligible role, but we'll just use this as an example. For most of your users, if not all of your users, apart from the break glass accounts, you want to make them eligible users as best practice, and you want to have those users elevate those particular roles when they need them, and not have those privileges assigned to their user. You can do this for particular groups as well, and if you don't apply to the particular users, you apply to security groups, and then users be nested in those user groups and they head to those particular permissions. If you go back to Entra ID and we look at roles, this will show you a very similar view to what we were looking at. So if we find our global administrator account again, or role, again assignments, description, and role. So it tells you the users that are global admins in this test tendency. When it started, this is permanent, there's no end time set, and you can add additional assignments from here. If you look at the role settings, this will show you exactly the same setup when we were looking at it from the Entra ID portal. So if we edit this, what it's showing you is that we have the role, once it's activated, the duration, the maximum duration that it can stay active for 8 hours. Now you can set it to 23.5 hours, you can set it as low as half an hour. Depends on what your organizational needs are and what action is needed when the user elevates their privileges to that particular role. No action requires MFA. Maximum enter conditional access authentication context. So if you want to enforce that, you can select that here. So in this role, for example, we're enforcing MFA. So it requires justification activation, requires ticket information activation. So if we enable this one as well, we'll have a look at this in a moment, if it lets us. So actually, let's do it from a security administrator point of view, because that's an eligible role that we have. So it'll be the same thing, security administrator. Again, if you look at role settings, we edit it exactly the same. So we've got 8 hours duration, we're enforcing MFA. So when you elevate your privileges to security administrator, you have to have MFA. Requires justification, requires a ticket number. So here there'll be a description box that says provide a description as to why you're requesting your privileges to be elevated. The ticket number, so if you're using something like ServiceNow and you've created a ticket on that ServiceNow item, you need to enter the ServiceNow ticket. Why this is needed, why this is important, why it's enforced here is, so if you were to have this requires approval for activation, it would go to a approval group and they would assess your request and approve it. So if you included a ticket number in here, they can log on to ServiceNow, take a look at that ticket, and then see if your request is a justified request or if it's not. And we'll have a look at that. So next, assignment, who is assigned to. So is it permanent? Do you want it to expire after a certain period of time? Allow permanent assignment or don't allow permanent assignment. Again, when do you want it to expire? Requires MFA on active assignment and requires justification. Who do you want to notify? By default, notifies admins, assigning groups, and improvers. We'll leave this as it is, it depends on what your needs are for your environment, so let's not save any of this. So if we went back to have a look at the roles, we have a look at, so if we click back to my roles, if you recall, I've got eligible roles for myself, which is security administrator, and active assignment, which is also security administrator. Now this won't work when we're trying to activate this role, because I'm activate an eligible role because I'm already active for it. So if we go back to manage Entra roles, we look at roles, what we can do is find that security role, and it'll show you active and eligible assignments in here, so you can remove the assignments from here. So what we're going to do is remove the active assignment, and then hopefully we can demo enabling the eligible assignment. So refresh this just to confirm. So I don't have an active assignment for the security administrator role anymore. So if we step back to looking at my roles now, we should see I've got a security administrator as an eligible assignment, and just 2 roles, compliance administrator and global administrator, as an active assignment. Both are deactivated. So when you activate this role, you'll see that it's asking for a reason. It's time for a start time. So you can have custom activation start time if you wanted, what time you wanted to start at, date, time. You could request it in advance. For example, you've got maximum duration for your activation of 8 hours. You can have less than 8 hours, half an hour if you wanted, but you can't have more than 8 hours in a particular activation, because that's what we've defined in the policy. If you're using something like service now, you know, you can define what it is. Service now, put your ticket number in here, service now 001123, give a reason, and then click activate. And because, if you recall, we've configured this activation for auto activation, it should step through the steps, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and auto activate for us. We don't have a request to approval in this particular process. Just give it a moment. It's a little bit slow, but it'll step through the stages for us. As you can see now, we've got an active security administrator assignment. So if it's active and you don't want it active anymore, you click on active, and then as you can see, it's step back. Sorry, I was in the wrong section. So as you can see, still eligible, you can activate it. But you can see in your active assignments, your eligible one is now active, and it has an end time 8 hours from when we've activated it, and you can deactivate it if you're finished with it. The other thing that we were focused on looking at when we were looking at the PowerPoint presentation was the dedicated portal for Entra ID. So if you navigate to entra.microsoft.com, it should log you in if you're already logged in, and this is the new home for Entra ID, and you'll see there's a lot of overlap between what we were looking at in portal.azure.com and looking at Entra ID in here, but there's other capabilities that are only visible to you within the dedicated portal. So you've got your home section here, which starts off with some details about setup guides, learn and explore Entra ID. You've got a quick look at all the product documentation, billing information, and you've got your secure score identified here. So this environment has a quite low score, 32.05%. And if you list top recommendations over here, so if you look at all your recommendations, it'll give you a list of, you know, priority, medium, high, low, what the recommendation is, the required license for it, whether it's free P1 or P2 for this capability that we're looking at that's got particular risk associated with it, the resource that's impacted, and the score. So you can improve your score by your secure score by implementing some of these recommendations. So if you select this, for example, it gives you, a status, a description, gives you the value is, and then action plan. So your remediation and below here it will show you all the resources that are impacted as part of this risk that it has identified. Again, if you look at a different one, here in the status, so you can see these are active. It's showing you some that are already been completed. So enable self-server passive reset has been completed. It was a low risk, and again, same thing, it gives you the priority. There's no impact resources because this has been implemented already. As you can see, the overview provides you similar information about basic tenant information, monitoring, and gives you some details about monitoring of this environment, sign-ins, date and time, number of signs in total, gives some priorities around country, data location, technical contact, recommendations, some setup guides. And then again, you can configure all your users from in here: groups, devices, applications, and then protection. We looked at identity protection in portal.azure.com, but under protection here you've got identity protection. This will be very similar to what we already looked at, and this being a test tenant, it'll all give you a little bit of information. Your user risk policy, your signing risk policies, and then the reports that we looked at when we were looking at the portal environment. Exactly the same, just minus to a centralized portal. If you onboarded any applications, your enterprise apps or app registration will be shown in here as well. And then conditional access we looked at through portal.azure.com. This is exactly the same. It's from a centralized portal, intra.microsoft.com. Exactly the same setup: name, locations, terms of use, the policies that you've configured, and new policies that you can configure in here. There's nothing different in here, and your signing logs are shown here. Again, you've got identity protection under protection and conditional access. You've got identity and governance, so your password reset, authentication methods we spoke about as well. So FIDO2 keys, text message, one-time password. They're all in this one centralized portal. It makes it more convenient for you to manage all the capabilities of Entra ID. So some of the stuff that you won't have seen in portal.azure.com is some of the new capabilities like global secure access. If you look at global secure access, this is Microsoft's replacement for VPN, allow you to access internal resources from anywhere without the need for a VPN or VPN client. It supports 3 traffic profiles, internet access, or controls what users can access on the internet, private access internally to your resources that are private to you. You might be running an internal application that you want to give them access to, whether it is on-prem, whether it's in Azure, whether it's in a different cloud provider, AWS, Google, wherever it might be, and control your Microsoft 365 profile. Again, out of scope for this, but if you're interested, look at the Welsh Azure user group on their videos. I've done a talk on this recently. And then the monitoring capabilities, alerts, auditing, traffic logs for the global secure access. And then if you need to raise a ticket with Microsoft in the settings, you've got the option to, under learn and support, a new support request. You've got the option to raise a ticket with Microsoft for any issues that you are having in your Microsoft portal. So this is the new centralized portal that Microsoft provides for managing all things Entra. You've also got the bit that we haven't looked at under identity. You've got a single blade for sign-in health, so sign-in logs, audit logs, show you all your sign-in history, priority filters, download any of the reports that are here, export data settings. You've got audit logs that are shown here as well, whether it's self-service, B2C, PIM, the category, the activity, and the status, and a status reason. Again, you could download this and configure export settings if you need to configure. You got health of your environment, authentic availability 99.99%, SLA. You've got log analytics if you want to take a look at any of your log analytics. If you've got log analytics configured, and run any queries against the data there. And you've got various workbooks in here under health and monitoring that you could run to give you information about your environment, sign-ins, for example, conditional access insight, continuous access evaluation, impact analysis of risk-based policies. So it's worth looking at and exploring these to see the kind of insight you can gain about your environment, project insights. Very beneficial, again, in a single centralized plane. So take some time, explore, and see what you can benefit from for all this. So you got specific workbooks, workbook templates, and you can add new from the gallery if you need to. So just to sum up what we've looked at, so we started looking at security defaults under manage and properties, and in this environment we've disabled security defaults because we're configuring everything through conditional access. Conditional access, we looked at how to set up conditional access, we looked at identity protection, we looked at configuring named locations. We also covered terms of use and how to reference these when creating new policies. We stepped through creating a new policy, how you can apply that to users and groups, and how it is beneficial when controlling access to your resources, devices, any device, Windows, Mac, Android tablet, iOS. Then we looked at privileged identity management and role-based access control, and how you can use that to control and provide just in time, just enough access to your users. And we looked at all the built-in roles and how you can create custom roles in Entra ID, and then we finished off by looking at the Entra ID portal and the capabilities that it provides. Hope this was beneficial for you, and hopefully catch up with you next year in the festive tech calendar 2025. Take care. Bye bye.